Welcome to Guided Reading, Part 1. Reading for Mindfulness and Meditation. Engage with the sensations, emotions, and thoughts that arise during the reading. This approach transforms reading from a passive activity into an active, meditative experience. What is guided reading for mindfulness and meditation? It's about being fully present during the reading, noticing the physical sensations, emotions evoked, and the ideas that come to mind. By practicing mindfulness while listening, you can improve your ability of focus and concentrate. Paying attention to the words can transform this simple act of listening into a powerful tool for personal growth and well-being. Find a peaceful environment, a quiet space where you can relax without distractions. You must be fully present and mindful during the reading for its benefits. Now, let's listen to the reading of Black is the Womb of All Things, written by author Edgar C. Reed. Chapter 1. Existence, the interplay of contrasting forces. The dreaming begins. I have wandered through the wilderness of sleep many times. My nights have often been crowded with dreams, fleeting, fragmented glimpses of other lives, places I've never seen, conversations with faces I did, and I did not recognize. Some were forgettable shadows, others lingered like the fragrance of something sacred just out of reach. But none have ever pierced the veil of reality like the dream I am about to share with you. In my dream, I did not merely observe, I traveled. Not with feet nor wings, but with something older than motion, the curiosity of spirit unchained. I left the world as one might leave a familiar room, gently, as if not to wake the walls. The earth fell away, not with violence, but with a kind of reverent silence, as though it too understood that this journey was not of geography, but of origin. I rose beyond the blue curve of the sky, through veils of stars that whispered their own names in languages forgotten by time. Each constellation was a living memory, not a mine, but of something vast that remembers everything. There were no directions here, no above or below. Only the sense of being drawn inward, outward, and backward all at once, into a great spiral of becoming. As I traveled, I began to understand that I was not flying through the heavens, I was flying through myself. The heavens were not separate from me. They were folded into the deepest corners of my being. I had mistaken the stars for distant things when in truth they were mirrors, infinitely ancient, infinitely nearby. They shone not to illuminate the path, but to remind me that the path had never been lost. And then, beyond all constellations, I found what had no form, no color, no sound, but was more real than anything I had ever touched. It was not a place but a presence, and in its stillness was the beginning of all stories. Here, time had not yet unfolded. Here, the first word had not yet been spoken. I stood, or rather, I was at the threshold of origin. It was there I realized this dream was not a fabrication of my sleeping mind. It was a memory, ancient and primal, long buried beneath the distractions of waking life. A remembrance of a soul's first breath. I had not flown into the future or some foreign heaven. I had returned to a moment before the world knew itself, before division, before the name of light or dark had been whispered into the void. In that unutterable silence, I felt the pulse of creation, not as a thunderclap, but as a breath held by the cosmos. I could feel every tree that would one day root itself, every river that would carve valleys, every sorrow and every joy that would echo through countless lives. It was all there waiting, and I was both witness and participant in that sacred pause before beginning. All around me was thick darkness, colder than ice, blacker than black. It was not mere absence of light, but a presence in itself, alive, conscious, and watching. This darkness was not frightening. Rather, it was infinite, encompassing, as if I had been cradled in the womb of something ancient and unknowable. There were no edges to it, no time, no direction, only the sensation that I was suspended in a space where forms had not yet taken hold. All around me stretched a darkness so profound it defied all earthly comparison, colder than ice, blacker than vantablack. It was not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something more ancient than the cosmic microwave background itself. This was not the darkness that follows the setting of the sun, nor the kind that lingers in shadowed corners. This was primordial, a blackness that existed before the world had words to describe it. It did not conceal, it revealed by stripping away all that was not essential. Suspended within it, I felt no fear. The instinct to recoil from the unknown was curiously absent. Instead, I felt a deep quietude, as if I had been returned to a place I had always known but never remembered. It was not an emptiness, but a fullness that exceeded comprehension. This was the darkness of origin, not of death. It was the silence before the first breath, the stillness before the first stirring of creation. Within this boundless space, I perceived two presences, not in the form of figures or voices, but as essences that breathed through the fabric of the dark itself. They were distinct, yet inseparable. One was forceful, directional, like a line stretching infinitely forward. The other was receptive, encompassing, like a circle without end. These were not merely masculine and feminine in the biological sense, but in the archetypal and metaphysical, principles as old as time and as foundational as existence. They were not at war, nor did they strive for dominance. They moved around and within each other, engaged in a rhythm so subtle it could barely be called motion. Yet it was through this gentle polarity that the void gained its pulse. The darkness was alive, not in the way a creature breathes, but in the way a thought stirs before it becomes language. I was not an observer, I was a participant in this living mystery. This space had no orientation. There was no up or down, no forward or back. Without the reference of form, time dissolved into something more fluid. I was suspended not in a place, but in a state of being, one that preceded the separation of subject and object. It was not a location to be mapped, but a condition to be felt. And in that formlessness, I came to understand the essence of potential. The dual forces I sensed were not merely coexisting, they were gestating. Something was being prepared in their embrace. I sensed this not with the mind, but with the experience, in the way one might feel dawn approaching long before the first light appears. Creation was not a distant event, but an imminent unfolding. The space between these two forces was charged with expectancy, like the breath held before the first word is spoken. Black was the womb of all things, not a place of hiding, but of incubation. It held not terror, but tenderness, a kind of sacred intimacy between what was and what might yet be. It did not press upon me, but held me in a way that made all striving seem absurd. I was not lost, I was returned, immersed in a unity that precedes division, in a truth that needs no name. In that moment, I understood that form is not the beginning, but the consequence. Before anything is shaped, before any thought becomes distinct, there is this, this primal field where opposites drift in silence. It is here that the seed of existence is conceived, not in struggle, but in stillness. The masculine does not impose, the feminine does not submit. Rather, they co-create through mutual recognition. To witness this was to remember something the waking world compels us to forget, that all being arises from a fertile tension. What we call creation is not an act of force, but an act of balance. It is the result of a deep listening between opposites, a communion from which the first light will someday emerge. But in that moment, the light had not yet come. There was only the potential for it, held tenderly in the arms of that ancient blackness. And so I remained, cradled in a presence both empty and complete. The dual forces continued their silent exchange, neither hurrying nor delaying. In their sacred stillness, I felt the first hints of a truth older than matter, that before all things were born, there was darkness, not as a lack, but as the beginning of love. I began to understand everything that would exist, every star, every sorrow, every birth and silence would emerge from this primal duality. Is not good versus evil, nor light conquering dark. It is a sacred mutuality, without which nothing could arise. Destruction is not an enemy to creation, it is its mirror. Stillness is not the absence of motion, it is its womb. And so, I floated in this metaphysical water, this amniotic field of polarity. I was not apart from it, I was it. My thoughts, my identity, even my name began to dissolve into the larger rhythm until I could no longer tell where I ended, and this eternal interplay began. I was the weight and the lift, the silence and the sound, the question that births its own answer. There was no need for language in this place. Everything communicated in essence. I understood wordlessly that this duality was not a flaw in the cosmos, but its brilliance. Order out of chaos. It was the necessary condition for emergence, for complexity, for love and loss and laughter and longing. Without two, there could be no marriage. Without separation, no unification. Without contrast, no light and darkness. Then little lights began to shimmer against the backdrop of the vast nothingness, as though reality itself were inhaling before the first word of creation. In the immensity of that blackness, deeper than night, older than memory, these glimmers did not merely appear, they revealed. Where once there had been pure absence, a flicker suggested the potential for presence. And in that suggestion, a star shone in the blackness. It was not merely that the darkness was giving way to light, but that darkness had become aware of its own limitations. The shadows were no longer infinite, they had edges. Boundaries began to breathe into existence, shaped not by force, but by contrast. Light did not conquer the dark, it revealed it for what it had always been. A silence waiting to be heard, a canvas awaiting the brushstroke of awareness. Each light seemed to carry within it the essence of 1,000 seeds, each seed a star, each star a nursery. These were not celestial bodies in the astronomical sense, they were the pillars of creation. With every flicker, they seemed to speak in a silent tongue, forming the syntax of a new existence. They did not impose order. Rather, they invited perception to participate in the birth of form from formlessness. The darkness was not lost. It had simply never been seen before. And in being seen, it gained dimension, depth, and dignity. It was not the enemy of light, but its twin, the necessary womb from which light is born. What I was witnessing was not a cosmic battle, but a sacred union. the marriage of the known and the unknowable. The lights grew in number, scattered across the vast expanse like thoughts emerging from the deep unconscious. Not chaotic, but not yet coherent. They danced with a subtle rhythm, as if echoing the first heartbeat of time. Each one a beacon, each one a moment in the endless unfolding of becoming. Their presence marked the beginning of articulation in a language older than words. This was not light that merely illuminated, it defined. By their emergence, the lights carved existence out of void. The void did not resist, it yielded willingly. And in its yielding, it became the cradle of all that would come to be. There was grace in that surrender, beauty in that humility. The darkness had allowed itself to be seen so that something else could unfold. It struck me then that I was not a bystander. I too was one of these lights, or perhaps the space between them. The vision was not outside of me, it was a reflection of something deep within. The cosmos was a mirror, and in its slow ignition, I glimpsed the kindling of my own awareness. Each star igniting was a question awakening. Who am I in relation to this vastness? This was the alchemy of perception, the transformation of unknowing into insight, of blindness into vision. Not merely the lighting of space, but the birth of consciousness. The stars were not placed randomly. They seemed to arise from intention, as though the universe was remembering itself, star by star. I was not separate from this remembering. I was its vessel. And so the cold void, once thought empty, revealed its deeper nature, not emptiness, but possibility. It had waited in perfect stillness for the spark that would awaken it. And now, with the faintest warmth of starlight, it began to respond. It was not the death of silence, but its evolution into music. A song whose first note had finally been struck. In the glow of those first lights, I understood something not easily spoken. That creation is not the imposition of order upon chaos, but the gentle listening to what is already present in silence. The stars were not intruders. They were invitations, and in their quiet burning, the cosmos whispered, "Here, in this space between darkness and dawn, something sacred begins." Then, in a slow unraveling of cosmic grace, I witnessed the stars begin to relinquish their light, not abruptly, but with a solemn dignity. One by one, they ceased their shining, their golden songs folding into silence. They were not merely extinguished, but transfigured, as if each collapse were a final rite in a grand, alchemical process. Their brightness did not vanish into nothingness. It became something else, something more hidden, more essential. Their deaths were not ends, but gestures of transformation. Each star exploded in a burst of radiant finality, casting forth veils of dust into the cold, embracing void. But these were not ashes of failure. These clouds were the fertile remnants of divine union, the substance of cosmic birth. For within each star had occurred a sacred consummation, a marriage of principles ancient and eternal. The light they once gave freely had been forged from the unity of opposites, and now, in death, that union bore fruit. The offspring of that celestial wedding were not beings, but possibilities, seeds of complexity hurled into the womb of darkness. The void, once barren and monolithic, was now pregnant with meaning. The dust was not inert, it carried memory, intention, the residues of a star that had once known both creation and annihilation. What scattered across the cosmos were not fragments, but futures. I saw the darkness swell. not in weight or gloom, but in substance. The black was no longer empty. It had become thick with becoming. Stars, planets, and moons of every aspect floated in slow majesty, suspended like thoughts in the mind of a dreaming god. The silence between them was not absence, but incubation, a sacred pause between breath and breath. Each world, each celestial body, bore traces of the stars from which they came, an inheritance of light wrapped in the blackness. Some glowed faintly, as if recalling their origin. Others were cloaked in darkness, still gestating their meaning. The universe had become a library of lives yet unlived, a gallery of forms sculpted by the memory of their origin. There was a lesson in this scattering, this breaking apart. The stars had not clung to their brilliance. They had given it up willingly, trusting in the purpose of their dissolution. Their explosions were sacrifices, and their fragments were offerings. They had not feared the dark, they had entrusted themselves to it. And in doing so, they had multiplied. The alchemical wedding was not a singular moment, but a continuous principle, echoing through each explosion, inscribed in every orbiting sphere. It was not enough that light had existed. It had to die, to dissolve, to share its essence. The stars did not seek to remain as they were. Their highest truth lay in their transformation, their willingness to become many through the act of surrender. I realized then that this cosmic spectacle mirrored the inward journey of the soul. The burning brightness of understanding, once achieved, must eventually fall silent, must give itself over to the darkness, so that new understanding might arise. Enlightenment is not a possession but process, one of ignition, dissolution, and scattering. Only then can wisdom be born anew. The darkness, once feared for its silence, had become a partner in the creative act. It received the dying star not with grief, but with reverence. It enfolded the ashes not in mourning, but in promise. The void had become a cradle, its silence no longer the absence of meaning, but the space in which meaning might take root. And so, I was in that vastness, no longer watching but participating. I too was made of the dust of dying stars. I too carried within me the result of an ancient union, the wedding of contrasting pairs, of presence and absence. In the depths of the stars, I saw not destruction, but a vast and sacred becoming. Seeing order arise from chaos not through suppression, but through interplay, through the dance of dual and contrasting forces whose interaction gives birth to form. From the chaotic blackness, where nothing yet was named or known, opposites stirred. As I would eventually awake and contemplate my dream, I understood their collision created. In their friction and fusion, the cosmos emerged, not as a fixed construct, but as a dynamic equilibrium, an unfolding harmony perpetually shaped by contrast. Is not order imposed upon chaos, but order arising from it, a sacred tension where being is born from the womb of becoming. In the oldest memories of the world, those carried not in books but in the silence between thoughts, there exists a tale that predates language itself, the wedding of contrasting pairs, or fire and ice. Is not a story to be told with facts, for it was never meant to be understood in terms of event, but in terms of essence. This union, so ancient it lives in the marrow of matter, represents the eternal convergence of all opposites, the great reconciliation where all division is revealed as illusion. Fire is will, the primal spark, the ceaseless striving toward form, light, and declaration. It is the impulse to be, to illuminate, to expand outward into expression. It burns with a longing to touch, to transform, to be known. Yet in its very nature, fire is restless. It consumes. It cannot hold, only reach. Alone, it is ungrounded, its radiance unable to endure. Fire is the desire of consciousness without the space to reflect. Darkness, in contrast, is the stillness beneath all becoming. It is the keeper of mysteries, the great container, the womb of possibility. Where fire demands to be seen, darkness invites retreat, introspection, the gentle folding in of light. It is the eternal listener. Darkness knows patience, silence, and the art of waiting. It does not destroy, it absorbs, enfolds, protects. But left alone, black remains potential unfulfilled, forever harboring but never revealing. The alchemical wedding of contrasting pairs is not the fusion of enemies, but the embrace of long-lost lovers. It is the recognition that creation requires both movement and rest, illumination and darkness, assertion and negation. When fire meets ice, it learns to endure. When ice accepts fire, it learns to become. Together, they do not annihilate one another, they transfigure one another. This union births the cosmos. Every star is a memory of their touch, every planet a testament to their balance. The world as we know it, its cycles, contrasts, and continuities, is woven from this foundational intimacy. Where there is passion tempered by humility, there is the wedding. Where light dances across still water, where a flickering flame casts deep silhouettes on ancient walls, there too is the union at play. Philosophically, this marriage speaks to the necessity of dialectic, the dance of thesis and antithesis into synthesis. In psychological terms, it is the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the reconciliation of the persona and the shadow. In spiritual language, it is the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine archetypes within the soul. However we name it, the pattern is the same. Unity is not achieved through domination or purity, but through relationship and mutual transformation.